What's up, everybody? Nate here. So President Joe Biden recently had his State of the Union address, and he talked about all things economy, inflation, and the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and Russia. In addition, President Biden announced a ton of changes that he'd like to see to our economy and our tax system in 2022 and beyond. And he said 1 year from right now, Americans will have pretty much nothing to worry about when it comes to our inflation problems, our economy, and the Russia-Ukraine war. Biden also said that he was going to cut our entire United States deficit in half by the end of 2022. And a ton of other things that are going to have massive implications on the future of our US economy under Joe Biden. So today I want to go over everything that Joe Biden said in his State of the Union address, his plan for your money in 2022, and how all of this is going to shape our economy not only this year, but in years to come. But before I break all of this down, do me a quick favor and hit, smash, or destroy that thumbs up button below and ring that notification bell too. Both of those two things are completely free and they help to show me that you like this video and that you want to see even more just like it. Thank you so much for doing that. And now what I want to do today is break down everything Biden said into 4 main categories. We're going to be talking about inflation, the US economy and worldwide economy, taxes, and the Russia-Ukraine situation. So let's start with inflation. What is President Biden's plan for inflation in 2022? Well, to give you just a little bit of context, inflation right now is the highest that we've seen in over 40 years. As of January 2022, inflation hit 7.5%. And that's bad for just about everyone in our economy because it threatens the purchasing power of all US consumers. Spending accounts for around 70% of our GDP in the United States, but if Americans can't really afford anything because prices are getting way out of control, well, that's going to hurt our economy in general. So what exactly is President Joe Biden's plan to fight inflation in 2022? Well, let's look at exactly what Joe Biden said about inflation in the United States. He said, quote, "Last year, 1/3 of all the inflation was because of automobile sales. There weren't enough semiconductors to make all of the cars that people wanted to buy. And guess what? Prices of automobiles went up, especially used vehicles as well." In addition, he called on all businesses and corporations in the United States to fight inflation themselves by lowering costs and not their wages. Next, he laid out 3 major things that will help lower the United States budget deficit and fight inflation at the same time. He said by making prescription drugs, childcare, and energy more affordable in the United States, that will essentially slash inflation this year. Okay, so let's go ahead and break that down. Biden wants companies to lower their costs instead of lowering wages. So what he's asking for is businesses to pay their employees more so that way they have more money to go out and buy things and pump more money into the economy. But also companies need to lower their costs so that way they don't have to have their products and services cost so much. Those prices will ultimately go down, which means consumers can buy more and they'll be making more money, which means they can buy even more on top of that. Now, to put this kind of in perspective for you, over the last 2 years, businesses have been taking on a ton of additional costs. With supply chain issues and the pandemic, companies have had to fork over way more money than they're used to. With the supply chains in particular, Americans have been buying a lot more things, which is great for companies because it improves profits and revenue. However, that also signals to companies that they need to produce more goods. One way to start producing more goods is to hire more workers and build more factories and improve your supply chain so that way you can send more of those products all throughout the country. But it's been really difficult for businesses to do so because they haven't really been able to find a lot of people to fill positions due to things like the Great Resignation. And there has been a ton of worker strikes all throughout the country for better benefits and better pay, which has prevented companies from making even more. That has all added additional costs on top of hiring more workers and building more factories. But then we also have the pandemic that we need to consider here. The pandemic really threw things off for a lot of businesses in our economy. Not only did it mean that restaurant and retail locations slashed their hours, businesses now had to provide a ton of extra sanitation for their locations. Now, in a lot of cases, I personally think that some of these sanitation measures should have been there in the first place, but the fact is they really weren't, and that's an additional cost that businesses are now pretty much forced to take on. Those are things that businesses can't really avoid right now. I mean, our supply chains will start to get better, but we can't really solve Americans' demand for just about everything right now without just paying people a lot more. President Biden in his speech said he wants to raise the federal minimum wage up to $15 an hour, which means every single state in the country would have to pay people a minimum of $15 an hour. That means it's going to be really difficult for businesses to lower all of their prices and costs because they're now paying people a lot more than they're used to, leading to some job loss. But that's pretty much happening anyway with the rise of automation and the great resignation in our country right now. The other side to costs for businesses is that they have a ton of their business overseas. Biden's argument is that if you bring a lot of those jobs, pretty much all of them in fact, over into the United States, then you save on shipping and supply chain issues will basically become non-existent. And in theory, you'll have way more Americans employed because all of those jobs that went overseas will come back to the United States, meaning more people to pay taxes and to buy things. Now, all of this is super complex, but I think what it's ultimately leading to is a lot of jobs lost. You're gonna have thousands of businesses in the United States and across the world bring business back to the US. They're gonna start building factories and making their headquarters right here at home. The problem is a lot of those traditional manufacturing jobs are not going to exist. And in the short term, this is gonna be very expensive for companies. It's a long-term investment, and that's basically what Biden is looking for, a long-term investment. But going off of the other things Biden said, lowering prescription drug costs, making childcare more affordable, and lowering energy costs would have a pretty significant impact on Americans' budget. He said that a third of inflation going up is due to the auto industry, and people weren't able to buy a lot of new cars because of the semiconductor shortage that we were facing in 2021 and now in 2022. The semiconductors are basically the brains of our electronics, and more specifically, the brains of our cars. And if we can't get those, then you can't make vehicles. That drove up the cost of used vehicles by over 40%, and new vehicles, their price went up by around 12%. That's year over year. He called on American automakers to start making all of their vehicles from start to finish in the United States. And not only that, but energy is a huge concern for Americans right now. I mean, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has caused gas prices to go up by around 40% in January alone. And they're going up even further, as 1 barrel of oil right now costs around $110. That's up from around $80 to $90, which was already much higher than we had seen in 2020. Part of the reason for that is because Russia produces more oil than pretty much any nation, so they control a lot of it. And if they can't bring it over here into the United States, well, then there's going to be less of it. That means you have a supply and demand issue, and with demand going up with people returning to work and going back to the office after the pandemic, well, you now have an oil shortage. And it hasn't got that serious yet, but gas prices are going way up almost every single day. Just about a week and a half ago, in my neighborhood gas station, the price of a gallon of gas was around $3.29. As of recording this video on March 3rd, that same gas station was charging around $3.88. That's a fast increase, and it's contributing to inflation even more. But here is Biden's plan. He has released around 30 million barrels of oil in United States reserves, and he expects to release around 60 million more across the entire world with the help of other nations. In the short term, that's going to mean a lot more oil is coming to the United States, which should bring down the price for a little while. But that's not really going to help in the long term if this Russia-Ukraine conflict continues for longer than expected. Which brings us to number 2. What is Biden's plan for our economy in 2022 and beyond? Well, in the long term, he wants energy prices to be a whole lot lower, and he wants childcare costs to also go down. These are some of Americans' biggest expenses, and if they are eliminated, then Americans, in theory, will have more money to spend on other things. Those two things, as well as lowering prescription drug costs, are all a part of Biden's, not yet passed, Build Back Better bill. This is essentially a social spending bill that would invest in America's education, energy, and living expenses. He wants to couple that with his America's infrastructure bill, which was passed in the latter parts of 2021. That bill and the Build Back Better bill aim to make the United States more energy independent, and I don't mean oil here. All of your major auto giants are switching to electric vehicles. They all have pretty much promised that they want to make exclusively electric cars by sometime in the 2030s. The problem is there's just not enough infrastructure in the United States to support that right now, which is exactly why they passed the infrastructure bill. The infrastructure bill will make America's dependence on electricity way more prevalent in the future. Biden wants to build 500,000 charging stations all throughout the country, so when people have all of these electric cars, they'll actually have places to charge them. It also aims to improve America's electrical infrastructure so we can actually send electricity all throughout the country in a more efficient way. Not only that, but build more wind turbines and solar panels that can actually harness the natural resources of our planet and world. Because right now, we're kind of running into an issue. You see, we want to go all electric, but it just doesn't really make much sense to do that right now. Most of the electricity that's created in the United States is created using coal. That's a fossil fuel and a non-renewable resource. President Joe Biden and his administration wants to only use renewable energy sources for electricity. That would hopefully save Americans thousands of dollars every single year, and it would make America more energy independent because now we don't have to worry about other countries and wars stopping the amount of resources that Americans can use. But then he also talked about bringing jobs back to America. Now, I already kind of mentioned this before early on in the video and said this would hurt manufacturing jobs. However, President Joe Biden doesn't really see it that way because in his view, these are going to be jobs built for the 21st century. They're not going to be your typical manufacturing jobs that left in the late 80s and mid 90s. These are going to be jobs of the future. Joe Biden said on this issue, quote, "We'll also cut costs and keep the economy going strong by giving workers a fair shot. Provide more training and apprenticeships, hire them based on their skills and not just their degrees." So I've talked a lot about this in previous videos, but if you have sort of the rise of automation, that saves businesses a ton of money, but it also means that millions of Americans are about to become unemployed. The only way to really fix that is to improve the education system in the United States, and that's pretty much what Joe Biden is discussing here. If our education system is improved, then all of the future jobs like building and fixing robots, managing company systems, and so on can all be done by human beings. Once everybody has those higher skills and there's a clear path for that, then the jobs of the past can be done by robots. That way our society can pretty much move forward. It kind of creates a relationship between the automation and our workforce. It's not really one or the other. They're kind of working together in that situation. And let's be honest, a lot of those manufacturing jobs, retail jobs, and restaurant jobs, people don't always really want to do. They only do them because they're easy to get and they're there. It's convenient, but if those don't really exist anymore and robots are the only ones doing them, well then we're gonna have to have people who have higher skills and higher education by default. Investing in that is going to be important, and I think that that could work out for both businesses and people in the long term. President Joe Biden also said by the end of 2022, our budget deficit in the United States is going to be cut in half. He hasn't really said how exactly he's going to do that yet, but this is a little bit of an unfair statement. You gotta remember, in 2020 and in 2021, prior administrations and even part of Joe Biden's administration were pumping trillions of dollars into the United States economy just to keep it afloat. We had stimulus bills and the Federal Reserve purchasing trillions of dollars worth of assets every single month. So yeah, the budget was way higher, and reducing it now is gonna be pretty easy because in his mind, the pandemic is going towards more of an endemic, which means it has localized kind of pockets of problems throughout the world, but it's not a worldwide spread disease. So in short, he's saying the pandemic is not going to be a problem for us anymore. With that being said, we don't need as much stimulus anymore, which the United States has already pretty much weaned the entire population off of that, and the Federal Reserve Reserve is set to end its quantitative easing program on Wall Street in March of 2022. Number 3, let's talk about taxes. So President Joe Biden said that under his watch, nobody making $400,000 or less per year is going to pay a penny more in taxes. And the reason he's using about the $400,000 a year mark is because anyone that makes around $400,000 or more every single year is considered part of the 1% of earners in the United States. Everyone else is the 99%. And his plan would essentially raise taxes on anyone making over $400,000 a year. Everyone else's taxes would remain exactly the same. In addition, President Joe Biden wants to make the child care tax credit so parents and families who have children would essentially get a tax break every single year depending on how many children they have. In his mind, this would help with child care costs, and it would also give American families a lot more money to go out and spend. He also basically alluded to our tax system being completely broken for the middle and lower class in the United States and that it needs some serious changes. In his mind, that would allow the United States to be rebuilt from the bottom up instead of the top down. These tax changes are unlikely to happen right now. I mean, the child care tax credit being universal is a part of the Build Back Better bill, and that is nowhere near getting passed in Congress right now. In addition, it's unclear how taxing the 1% of the United States would really work. Most of those Americans don't really make an income. That's how they're able to pay little to no taxes. He also called out businesses and corporations for paying pretty much $0 in federal tax, and that under a new plan, he would make them pay a minimum of 15% in federal taxes every single year. But the reason a lot of these businesses and individuals don't pay a lot of taxes is because they have found tax loopholes in our system. You're taxed the most on your job. It's called the income tax. If you don't have an income, then you can't be assessed an income tax. The wealthiest Americans in the United States don't typically have like a regular job, so they don't get taxed a particular amount. All of their money is in investments and stocks and assets that they hold. They get paid from that, and they also use money from their businesses to fund their lifestyle, which is also not really taxed. The only time they actually get taxed is when they sell a stock or sell parts of their assets. And that could get pretty tricky. I know President Joe Biden has talked about raising the capital gains tax as well. He didn't really talk about it in this State of the Union speech because it hasn't really been super popular and is also unlikely to get passed through Congress. But while Joe Biden is president, I'm sure we're gonna see a lot more tax proposals coming for regular Americans and the wealthy elites in the United States in the future. And finally, I wanna talk about the Russia-Ukraine situation. President Joe Biden said that the United States right now is inflicting serious pain on Russia via economic sanctions. He also announced a brand new task force that is going to be hunting down Russian oligarchs and their assets and preventing them from moving all throughout the world. Because right now, United States sanctions and worldwide sanctions are putting a ton of pressure on the Russian economy and the worldwide economy. Because of that, Russian oligarchs and businesses have been trying to move their money out of the country, but it's been difficult. The United States and the rest of the world has banned the Central Bank of Russia and a ton of major companies in Russia as well from using the SWIFT banking system. That pretty much connects all of the countries together in one universal banking system, and Russia has been kicked out. President Joe Biden also announced that he was closing off travel from Russia. This means all flights from Russia cannot enter American airspace. That puts even more of a squeeze on their economy. And Russia right now is hurting bad. The ruble, Russia's official currency, has dropped significantly in value. The Russian stock market has collapsed. In fact, it's not even currently trading right now, and Russian-related stocks are also starting to tank across the world. But with all of that being said, Russia still has a lot of power here, because remember, they are one of the top producers of oil and also of wheat and a ton of other metals. They're preventing a lot of that from getting into the United States States and other countries, meaning the prices of all of those goods and services are going to continue to go up. Now, the United States can impose even more sanctions on the country if it wants to. And as this conflict prolongs, it's probably going to do that. Now, the Federal Reserve in the United States says this Ukraine-Russia conflict is not going to have a massive effect on our economy in the short term. However, in the long term, we could see inflation go through the roof. Energy is a big part of what Americans spend some of their money on. And if all of that is costing them more, then your next CPI report is going to go up even further. Joe Biden also said, quote, "When the history of this era is written, Putin's war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger." And obviously that is yet to be seen. But right now, all of these economic measures are hurting Russia the most, from its government to central bank to its people. And there's not really a lot of ways for them to end this right now unless they pull their troops from Ukraine. Now, I do want to mention here that President Joe Biden said a lot in his State of the Union speech. The whole speech is around an hour and a half long, and I encourage you to go out and watch it yourself to get all of the information. More than I can possibly cover in a 15 to 20 minute video. And of course, like all things, it sounds good in theory, but now we actually have to test it out and see if it works in real life. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about President Joe Biden's State of the Union speech? Do you think his plans to fix our economy, inflation, and our tax system will work, or do you think that they are terrible ideas and that the country needs to find a new solution ASAP? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all of the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if videos more your thing, I'm putting out updates 7 days a week on this channel, and I've actually got another update ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everyone. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.